Hi everyone and welcome. Today's video is going to be focusing on the VermiBags because for me now it's been approximately 6 months since the VermiBags made their way into my wormery, and since day one I've been composting in my VermiBags using Nightcrawlers. And one thing that you might have noticed over there when we were taking a closer look at the bags was that the bags no longer have these pieces of cardboard covering up their vents, because each of those bags has an opening on the top with a screen, and that allows for a nice amount of airflow in and out of the bin. But to try to keep the moisture in, I was using these pieces of cardboard to cover up those holes on top. But as of not too long ago, we adopted a new method of trying to retain moisture within those bags. So we're going to check in on that today. We're going to be giving them some food. So I've got my bag of supplies here. I once again just grabbed the entire bag from the freezer, so they won't be getting all of this, just a portion of it. And, you know, as usual, I've got the coffee here and other things to include in the feeding. But yeah, since it's been now 6 months since I've had these bags in service, I'm also using this as sort of my 6-month check-in to, you know, size them up in terms of just overall, you know, experience in terms of ownership. You know, just to try to give you my thoughts on how I'm liking the VermiBags in my wormery. So let's go grab that frame that holds the VermiBag Mini and bring the whole thing over here, and we'll get a closer look at how things are coming along in that bin. So now down in the bin, you can see some flying insects have kind of made themselves at home here. Some of them have just perished, and their little bodies are resting here on top of this cardboard. Other ones are swarming around, other ones are crawling around. I could see some over here on the fabric as well. Doesn't seem terrible, although it's not ideal. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. Just as we make our way lower, we see another variety of insect. Unless it's just the same insect and they're kind of piggybacking on each other. I'm not sure what I'm seeing there. So we'll continue removing layers, and now we're down right beneath the plastic layer, the vapor barrier, which has a couple worms attached to it. So we'll just knock those little guys off so that it's safe to set the plastic aside. And the worms right here on the surface look pretty content. Looks like they're enjoying things. A lot more so than what I'm used to. I'm just not used to seeing any worms hanging out on the surface of this bin, mainly because the surface was always rather dry. However, that plastic sheet is helping a lot. And I mean a lot. And this piece of paper has so many worms on it, it makes me wonder if I'm even going to be able to remove it. So let's try flipping it upside down briefly. Maybe a number of the worms will just drop off on their own accord. I guess the rest of them will try to help off the paper. Here it looks like one has squirmed in between the sheets of the paper. Alright. I don't think we're going to worry that much about it. It's only a short period of time and the paper will remain damp if there's still any worms hanging out in it. And now we get to see how things are progressing. This is the very moldy bread that was placed in here almost rock hard and is still very, very hard. Still has not been fully infiltrated by the moisture. This piece, however, is very soft and breaks apart much more easily. So I'm going to be trying to break these apart a little bit to see if that helps them in their breakdown process. Yeah, this huge piece of bread will benefit for sure by being broken up into smaller chunks. I wonder if we keep it all in one place, maybe we can make a special effort to be sure we've placed something really moist on top of it to try to help rehydrate it. I'm not sure what it is that was added as food here alongside the bread. It's been 8 days now since this bin was last fed, and I did not review the last video, although sometimes I do, and as a matter of fact I did just review the videos in which I had originally launched the worms into this container, as well as the 3-month check-in that I did back in January. Now, I guess I'm sort of breaking my own rules here, because for some time now I've been wanting to stick to top feeding this bin only without creating a pit for the feedings or without disrupting the material or picking down into it. But it almost seems like, you know, on the occasion of it being at the 6-month mark, maybe we can do a little bit of digging just to check in on the corn. Because even when I watched the 3-month check-in video, this corn was found during excavation of the material, even commented how it's been so long that this corn's already been in there, and that was 3 months ago. And now, 3 months later, it's still whole, but I think this is going to be the end of it if I do this, if I break it. But that to me always seems like the measure of whether or not the corn's been infiltrated adequately by the worms, is if I can chop it up with my fingernail, break it apart, then it's really not far away from just falling apart and being history. So here again, I'm just going to apply the concept of more surface area being better on any one given food item. So instead of this just being one cob of corn, now it's a number of individual pieces that can be approached from all sides now. So I'm not going to try to excavate that other piece of corn now that we kind of know where it stands. You know, maybe at some point in the future we'll give ourselves another pass and let us excavate into here a little bit to be able to see how that other piece of corn's progressing. But I'd like to just stick to feeding on top and not disrupting any of the material down below the surface. I guess I'm going to try to scoop some of this chunked up bread particles in towards the middle so that the food we add on top can hopefully help increase the moisture level of that bread, help it break down. I guess these grapes, if I see these grapes, they're still kind of intact and whole, I'll just try to punch them through, try to rupture them so that the insides of them, the juicy insides of them, can be accessed. So, I mean, some people might look at this and think to themselves, hey, you know, there's plenty of food in there. Why does this bin need to even be fed? I don't know. I'm kind of a proponent of always providing a nice ample supply of food. Giving the food that you add today a chance to sort of get a jump start on breaking down so that the worms can actually make use of it at some point in the near future. I think the other consideration is that it's warming up now. It's springtime. It's going to get warmer, and I got a feeling that the activity in this bag is going to pick up as well. So I wish I can give a better, more thorough examination of it since we are at the 6-month mark. But I just want to keep to not disrupting the material in this bin too much. That was kind of something I promised myself way back a number of weeks ago, and I've been doing a pretty good job keeping to it. So we gave ourselves one chance to check out how that corn's doing, but let's get back to not bothering this and just feeding it on top, covering it back up, and let things get back to normal. Okay, so in this feeding we're getting some greens and some veggies and some fruits. I would say that roughly amounts to about 2 heaping handfuls of food just added. Pretty good, you know, pretty good size, small particles of food. Nothing too large, stuff that they should be able to break into pretty readily. But yeah, you know, with so much other food in here that's already so far along, this stuff probably isn't going to see much action from the worms for a while. So we're just going to let the microbes and all the little microscopic creatures in the bin get their hands on that stuff first and get things started, paving the way for the worms to be able to eventually make their way into here too. So this is really working well. Oops, there's one more worm that stayed on the plastic by accident. But we're going to restore that whole terrarium effect here. Terrarium effect is working really nicely in this bag, I gotta say. I definitely like the consistency of the material, and we have, you know, visual confirmation of the fact that the worms are really working the top surface now. As soon as we remove that piece of plastic and then we remove that first layer of newspaper, we saw a nice large amount of worms hanging out enjoying the food there. So alright, I'm giving this a thumbs up. I like the way things are looking in here. Let's work our way over to the VermiBag tote and see how the African Nightcrawlers are doing. Okay, well, the answer to your question is yes, you are correct. I did forget to add the coffee again, like I very often do. You are correct. I totally spaced out and forgot to add the coffee again. Another of my trademark goof-ups, but it's okay. Maybe they'll get some the next time. For now, it's just what they got, and I'm going to be satisfied with that. For now, I just want to get to this bin as well and get this stuff taken care of. I guess that's the one oddity I'm noticing. Something I don't see in my normal tubs is these flying insects gathering within the bag. So I'm not sure. That's just one of my little observations. That doesn't bother me too much, but still, I guess I would sort of prefer if they weren't in here. But they're not really creating too much of a problem, so I'm not going to sweat it too much. Here, just trying to see if there's anything in between. I don't think there's any worms in between this piece of paper and the plastic. So I think we just have to make sure we knock off any worms that are adhered to this newspaper on this side. And we could set this aside for a moment. Here again, we're seeing worms right on the surface enjoying the recirculating moisture. The recirculating moisture is such an added benefit. I can totally tell that it's going to help things immensely in all my bins, because I've not only added it to these two bags to help retain moisture, I've done it in all of my systems at this point. Although, now that I'm kind of checking the very, very far edges, I could feel that stuff on the very far outer perimeter is drying up, becoming little concrete balls. That's the one thing about vermicompost, is that it becomes an amazingly hard substance when it dries. But you know, you get it wet again, it'll soften up again. It's not a showstopper. It's at this point, it's just really an indicator telling us that there's still a fair amount of moisture that's leaving the bin, apparently through the surface of the material out here on the edge. Although when you dig down, it's not so bad. Maybe it is just the material right on the surface that's getting exposed to the air, since the plastic doesn't reach all the way out to the edges, and it's just losing it to the evaporation, making me wonder if maybe I should be covering the bag up again with that cardboard that you know, was there to keep this ventilated mesh opening on the top covered. Maybe I will go back to doing that, at least in this bin. Now, again, we're at 6 months in these VermiBags, so I'm going to do a little bit extra probing around just to sort of size things up. And I'm actually thinking that at this point, I've still got enough room that if I wanted to, I could maybe start thinking about trying to wind down this bin and prep it for harvests at some point in the near future. Because, you know, it is spring, and this bin has been in service for quite a while. I've always just given the VermiBags, or more specifically the Nightcrawlers, additional time because they've always been in such small numbers. I have red wigglers in huge quantities, but my Nightcrawlers all emerged from cocoons, and that was about, I guess, 11 months ago at this point. So at that point I had very few. At this point, though, I think there's been a chance for the population to propagate a little bit and to expand. So I'm kind of counting on the fact that at some point soon, that increased generation will also start reproducing and increasing my population. So I just want to start treating these guys just like any other of my worm bins. Inspect the material, get a sense of how close to harvest it might be. If it seems like it's ready, then, you know, start taking the steps to get the material harvested and get the worms started on a fresh batch elsewhere. So I'm actually digging right down to the bottom. I could feel the fabric on the bottom as I scoop up from down there. And I guess down here in the middle is where we're going to find some of the food items from the last feeding, such as this really moldy big chunk of bread. Try to break this up, but without breathing in all those mold spores that I'm kicking up into the air. So let's try to keep this stuff a little bit covered up. It's half of a mango pit. Coming along pretty good. Yeah, the feeding is coming along pretty nicely. All the way down at the bottom of the feeding zone, it's nice and moist. Not only because of the food that's been getting broken down right above there, but also because of what's on the bottom of the container. On the bottom of the container is a piece of wood with a piece of aluminum foil there to keep the moisture in the bin. So I think there's a little bit of added protection there too to help avoid lost moisture to evaporation. So gradually we're getting to the point where we can manage moisture in this bin a little bit more effectively than we did in the very beginning. The material way down low is pretty much all castings. Here and there you come up on something like, you know, I don't know what this is. I think it's food, getting broken down gradually. Other things that you pull up are hunks of still whole bedding material, although not too much of that. Really not seeing much of that at all, actually. Some dry chunks, which I think once it gets recirculated into the moist material, it'll be better. I'm going to move all of this bedding material that we scraped off the top over to the other edge. Okay, so we can get a sense of how things look down here. Again, pretty dry going down to the very bottom. So I think combining it with some of the more moist material nearby here will only benefit it. And I think that when we put this bin away, we're probably going to want to add a larger piece of plastic to the top to help keep the moisture in a little bit better. So I think we finally stumbled on a section in the feeding zone where the worms are really enjoying whatever it is that they're eating. I'm not sure if it's these grapes or what, but we just pulled out a huge handful of material that's pretty much teeming with African nightcrawlers. It's pretty cool. Don't want to disrupt them too much. See if we can get them back down where they were for the most part. I did pull out this piece of corn. So the corn was all added to these bags at the same time so many months ago. But the same as we saw earlier, the corn is still holding up pretty good, but I'm not going to try to break that piece up. I'm just going to leave it be. Down here the material is getting a little bit more moist again, a little bit more comfortable. And with that we're coming up on worms hanging out there. So it does seem like they're seeking out those more moist pockets where they can be more comfortable, and definitely shying away from the more dry sections. So I think this this will be a good idea. It will be a good thing for us to do, which is to maybe just replace that piece of plastic that I'm using now with a larger piece that, you know, covers up the entire top surface. I guess the overly dry material down here too, I'm just trying to combine it with some more damp stuff. And at the same time, I'm just trying to decide whether, you know, any sort of extraordinary measures are needed to address the dry material in here. As I think about it, it seems that, you know, blending it together is producing a pretty decent result. I don't know if it's really going to drag the moisture level of the moist stuff down as it starts to absorb some of it. So hopefully that's not the case. I'm going to assume that just by adding another fresh feeding, that we're going to be adding enough moisture to the bin to help things continue to be okay. And then by adding also a better, larger piece of plastic across the top, that will also provide an improved retention of moisture in here. I guess the one thing is, there it is. My curiosity would not let that go. Was, hey, where's that other piece of corn? So they're both still intact, and they're going to be right here at the edge of the feeding zone. So I'm just going to supplement whatever food it is that is in here now with more. I guess my glove is history. There's my thumb. I put the coffee right here in front of me to remind myself to actually use it. So we'll start with the coffee this time. I'll just lay out a little bit of it on the very bottom. And the grit is also something that we didn't add to the VermiBag Mini, so the European Nightcrawlers didn't get any of that either with their feeding. But there again, none of this is really strict or mandatory, so they'll be just fine without it. Here we're going to add the grit because we remembered. And this time I'm actually placing it under the newly added food. And now that we've chunked up all that bread that's in here, I see I've got another piece of bread in my food supply here. It see, it was starting to develop some green color, so it ended up in the worm food collection. I'm going to try by breaking this thing up and give it a little bit of an advantage versus being just a single huge piece of bread. Hopefully that helps. There's the corn. Okay. And here too, I think we're going to go with the two-handful approach. It seems like a good amount to give them, especially considering there's still hunks of residual food in here from previous feedings. So I like what I'm seeing in here. After 6 months, the African Nightcrawlers in here are doing pretty good. Like I said, these Nightcrawlers were in other bins before they made their way into the VermiBags. So the Nightcrawlers themselves are actually about 11 months old now, the entire population. I would think over that time there's probably been a little bit of reproduction and a little bit of breeding, but I would definitely like to see their numbers continue to rise. As the temperatures get warmer now that we're in spring, my hope is that these guys are going to get a little bit more active, a little bit more feisty, hopefully start breaking their food down a little bit more quickly than they normally do, and maybe start reproducing too. So I also hope that the added moisture of the new plastic that we're going to add also helps. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed for this one. Hopefully at some point soon I can crack the code on how to manage the moisture in this effectively and easily, because it's always very manageable if you check it regularly and you come with your spray bottle and you add water when you see that it's needed. But if you're like me, you don't want to be that hands-on with each bin, although it might not seem that way. If you watch my channel, it does seem like I'm pretty hands-on, but you know, here again, another example of this bin not having been touched in the past 8 days since the last feeding. and me preferring not to have to go into here to check on things. It's just so much more comfortable to sort of know that it's able to self-regulate to a certain point without requiring such hands-on attention. We're going to be putting this paper back on as we did before, and the plastic we used, gosh, it really does seem like it goes all the way out to the edges. But I'm just wondering if maybe we could help it a little bit, you know, by going all the way out to the edge here and actually going up the edge. And then with the help of this similarly shaped bag, we'll do the same on this side. We'll kind of ride up the edge, going all the way out to the two sides. This one's full of little holes, so it's probably good that they're working together in conjunction to help keep the moisture down in here. So let's keep our fingers crossed. I'm not going to bother restoring the covering over the container itself. I'm just going to leave this this mesh more or less open to allow it to ventilate air. But I really don't know what to expect, you know. It's always a little bit of a surprise with these VermiBags. It's a learning curve, you know, learning how to manage your population in different types of containers and reaping the benefits of each container, depending on what it brings to the table. Sometimes at a loss, you know, sometimes you're giving up something else to get one benefit, you have to give up another feature or something like that. So here, I think the main benefit to using the VermiBags is the additional airflow, enabling the microscopic life in the bins to flourish because of the abundance of air. So with that, obviously you need to deal with the evaporation that goes hand in hand with the good airflow. But I think we're getting there. I think we're starting to figure it out over time. So that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed my 6-month check-in on my VermiBags, in which my Nightcrawlers exist. This bag in particular, I think we'll have to get set up for harvesting at some point soon. So perhaps the next feeding, whenever it is that we come check in here again, maybe at that point we will start considering maybe setting up a horizontal migration rather than feeding down the center, you know, moving the entire contents of the bin over, potentially picking out any large remaining chunks. And then once we've got all the worms hanging out in one particular spot, hopefully having evacuated the finished castings, we can scoop out the castings and include them in this year's planting when we get the garden going. So, all right, everyone, thanks for watching. I appreciate your company. If you enjoyed the video, and I hope you did, as always, please remember to give me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. Also consider becoming a subscriber to the channel as well. That's appreciated too. All right, everyone, have a great day. Bye now.